Okay, Reddit, I really need to get this off my chest because I feel like I'm slowly losing my mind here. I've always prided myself on being professional at work. I don't gossip, I don't play politics, and I just do my job. But everything changed when the boss's daughter, Elizabeth, showed up. Honestly, I didn't even know she'd be working here. She just appeared one Monday morning, all polished and perfect, like she had walked straight out of a magazine. And I swear, every single day since then, she's been on a mission to make my life miserable, or at least, make herself look like the star while I struggle to exist in her shadow. Elizabeth is stunning. There's no denying that. Her dresses are always impeccable, her hair and makeup are flawless, and she has this magnetic presence that makes people pay attention without even trying. At first, I tried to ignore her. It's just her way, I told myself. She's trying to fit in. But then the little things started to pile up. She smiles at the boss and my colleagues, offers to bring them coffee, and always somehow manages to be in the right place at the right time. I caught her a few times whispering to coworkers, and it was always a tiny jab at someone's work. Or worse, my work. And the worst part? People believed her. At least, they seemed to. I should back up a little. My boss, Mr. Green, has always been, well, let's call it arrogant. He has this way of talking down to everyone in the office, like he's doing them a favor just by breathing the same air. I've learned over the years that being competent isn't always enough. You have to survive his ego. And Elizabeth? She seems to know exactly how to play his game. She laughs at his jokes, sometimes the ones I think are actually insulting or stupid, and he laughs harder. She nods enthusiastically when he gives an order, even if it's ridiculous, and she repeats his ideas back to him in a way that makes him think they're her own insights. I've noticed it. I've watched it. And honestly, it makes my blood boil. The first time I realized Elizabeth might be a problem was actually kind of subtle. I had been working on a report for weeks, something that required data from multiple departments, careful analysis, and a tight deadline. I was proud of it. Really proud. I brought it to the boss for review, and Elizabeth was there, smiling as usual. She asked if she could take a look at it, and I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no. She didn't need to see my work. But I decided to trust her. Big mistake. That night, I found out she had casually shared my report with the entire office, and then added her own notes that twisted some of the data in ways I knew would make me look careless if anyone paid attention. And of course, the boss commented on it the next morning. I took a deep breath, explained the original numbers calmly, and pointed out where the discrepancies came from. I got through it, but it left this sour taste in my mouth. She wasn't just trying to look good, she was actively sabotaging me. It didn't stop there. Every day, Elizabeth would find a new way to insert herself into my work. She'd pop up in meetings, ask to help me with my projects, and subtly undermine me by asking leading questions that made me doubt myself in front of others. I caught her a few times laughing with coworkers after I left a meeting, whispers that I could almost hear. She'd ask questions that seemed innocent but were designed to make me stumble. And somehow, despite all of this, the boss never seemed to notice. Or worse, he seemed to prefer her over me. What's weird and frustrating is that I don't even feel like she's all that competent. Her resume is fine, don't get me wrong, but she doesn't have the years of experience I do. And yet, because she's the boss's daughter, it's like she's untouchable. She can flub a presentation or forget a minor detail and no one bats an eye. I do the same, and suddenly I'm careless or unprofessional. I try to remind myself not to let it get to me, but when the whispers start, when the side eyes from coworkers happen, it's impossible not to feel small. The thing that scares me the most, though, is how she seems to know exactly what will trigger me. I can see it in her eyes, this mixture of amusement and malice. And for the first time in my career, I feel like I'm not just facing a challenge. I'm facing someone who wants to break me. I can't decide if she enjoys it because she's cruel or because it gives her power. Either way, it's exhausting. So that's where I'm at. I'm still holding on to my professionalism, still trying to do my best work. But I feel like every day is a battle I didn't sign up for. And it's only been a few weeks. I know I need to figure out how to handle this because it's affecting me more than I'd like to admit. My confidence wavers. I question myself constantly, and I can't help but replay every interaction with Elizabeth in my head. It's exhausting. I guess I'm posting here because I need some validation, or maybe advice. Has anyone else had to deal with a coworker who seems untouchable just because of who they know? Who actively undermines you but smiles like an angel in front of the boss? How do you survive that without losing yourself? Because right now, I feel like I'm treading water in a storm, and Elizabeth, she's the hurricane. Okay, Reddit, brace yourselves, because things have escalated fast, and I'm honestly not sure how much longer I can pretend this is just work. Elizabeth, yes, the boss's daughter, the perfect little angel of the office, has a whole other side, and I'm starting to see it for what it really is. On the surface, she's this bright, helpful, cheerful person. She'll walk in with a tray of coffee, flash that flawless smile, ask the boss about his weekend, and everyone else seems to just melt in response. People laugh at her jokes, even the ones that aren't funny. She remembers birthdays, gives compliments, knows who likes what snack, and somehow makes it all look effortless. Honestly, if you didn't know better, you'd think she was some kind of office fairy sent to sprinkle happiness everywhere. But behind that smile, oh God, behind that smile, she's a nightmare. She whispers, she gossips, she manipulates, and the worst part? She's subtle about it. So subtle that it almost feels like paranoia when you notice it at first. I overheard her one day, leaning over to a colleague, whispering about me. "Did you see how she messed up that report?" she said. And she didn't even lower her voice enough for it to be private. I froze mid-step, heart racing, because she wasn't just criticizing. It was like she was planting seeds of doubt in everyone's mind. I wanted to storm over and tell her off, but I stayed put, watching her grin like nothing had happened. It wasn't just me. She does this with everyone. I've caught her whispering little jabs about someone else's presentation, someone else's meeting performance, even someone's choice of outfit. And everyone laughs politely, because she's so charming. But I can see the flicker of doubt in their eyes. That's the worst part. The way she manages to turn colleagues into her little audience, questioning themselves while she remains untouchable. It's exhausting just watching. The thing that really gets me is how calculated she is. One minute, she's leaning over my desk, offering to help me fix a minor error in a report. I politely decline because I know my work, and honestly, I don't need her help. But then, when she leaves, I find little changes she's made behind the scenes. Numbers slightly off. Phrasing that changes the tone of the report. And because she's the boss's daughter, she can claim innocence, or just shrug, and somehow the blame never sticks to her. There was this one morning that really got under my skin. I came in, bleary-eyed, clutching my coffee, and she was leaning against my desk, smiling like she'd just won the lottery. "Morning," she chirped. "I looked over your presentation last night. So cute. I made a few tweaks. Thought you'd like them." I blinked. Tweaks? I hadn't asked for anything. And of course, she had highlighted every tiny flaw in a way that made my work seem sloppy, and then presented it to the boss as her own initiative. I could feel my stomach twist, but I forced a smile. "Thanks, Elizabeth. I'll look at them." And I did, in private, fuming the entire time. Every tweak was her trying to make me look incompetent, all while keeping her hands spotless. And then there's the whispering. It's like she has a radar for weakness. If she senses someone is tired, insecure, or overworked, she'll lean in, whisper something that seems benign, and leave the office buzzing with tiny rumors. I caught her doing it to a junior colleague, Maria, just last week. Maria was nervous about a presentation, and Elizabeth whispered, "Don't worry, you probably won't even notice they'll see your mistakes." Maria went red and stumbled through her slides. I wanted to shake Elizabeth, scream at her, but she just stood there smiling, serene, like she'd done nothing wrong. I've tried to keep my head down, honestly. I tell myself she's insecure, or maybe she just doesn't know better. But then I see the way the boss looks at her, and I know it's not just naivety, it's privilege, and it's weaponized. Every smile she gives him seems to reinforce her innocence, while I'm left sweating over every detail, second-guessing myself, and constantly aware of her hovering presence. The worst moments are when she does it in meetings. I'll be presenting a proposal, confident, prepared, and she'll lean back, arms crossed, and offer little comments designed to make me hesitate. "Interesting point," she'll say, in that sweet, almost innocent tone. "But did you consider—" And she always frames it as helpful, but everyone can see the tiny condescension. I can see people nodding, taking her words seriously, and I feel my cheeks burn. Every time I remind myself to breathe, to stay calm, to answer firmly. But inside, I'm screaming. Honestly, Reddit, it's getting to me. I feel like I can't enjoy my work anymore. I catch myself rehearsing responses, plotting ways to defend my work. Or worse, wondering if maybe she's right. Maybe I am slipping. Maybe I am doing something wrong. And that's exactly what she wants. She's not just competing. She's eroding my confidence day by day, little by little. At this point, I've started keeping detailed records of everything: emails, meetings, interactions. I don't want to be paranoid, but I know this is strategic on her part. I can't just rely on my memory, because she's clever. She smiles, she laughs, she acts innocent, and then she leaves you wondering if you're imagining the entire thing. I'm not imagining it. I'm not crazy. I've learned that now. But it's still exhausting. And every day I feel like I'm walking on eggshells in my own office. So yeah, that's the latest. Smiles, whispers, and constant undermining. Elizabeth is everywhere, Reddit. Everywhere. And I feel like I'm shrinking just to make her feel bigger. I don't know how long I can keep this up, but I guess I have no choice. I need to survive. And somehow, I need to figure out how to do it without losing myself in the process. I think I've officially hit my breaking point. The past week has been hell, and Elizabeth is now officially in full "I will ruin you" mode. It started with something that, on paper, seemed small, but in reality, it was like the first bullet in a war I didn't ask to fight. I had been working on a report that was supposed to be the crown jewel of the quarter. It involved cross-departmental data, projections, and a proposal for a new client outreach plan. I was proud of it. I had stayed late, double-checked every figure, triple-checked every sentence. I even polished the graphs so they looked professional without being flashy. I knew this report could make the boss take notice of my competence. And then, the sabotage began. Elizabeth accidentally dropped my flash drive while pretending to help me transfer the files. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice this saccharine mix of panic and charm. I froze, clutching my coffee, because my first instinct was rage, but I didn't want to make a scene. I politely declined her offer to help fix it, thinking I could handle it myself. I thought, okay, small accident, fine, I'll just redo it at my desk. But, of course, the boss noticed. Mr. Green called me into his office the next morning, the report open on his screen. I could feel Elizabeth hovering nearby, that perfect little smile on her face like she hadn't just set me up to look incompetent. "I'm concerned about these inconsistencies," he said, voice cold. "This isn't what I expected from someone at your level." My heart sank. I could feel the heat rising to my cheeks, and for a split second, I wondered if I should just crumble. Then I took a deep breath. I looked at the report, then at Elizabeth, then back at the boss, and calmly explained what had happened. I outlined every figure, every source, every calculation, showing that the inconsistencies weren't mine. They were the result of the file mishandling. And I didn't stop there. I explained how I had corrected the errors, walked him through the revised version, and demonstrated why it was now accurate and even stronger than before. Elizabeth, of course, tried to jump in. "Well, I thought maybe," she started, voiced that infuriating mix of innocence and smugness. I didn't let her finish. I kept my tone professional, calm, and steady. "I appreciate your concern, Elizabeth, but I've taken care of the discrepancies. The report is now ready for review, and all data is verified." I felt my pulse racing, but I kept my posture straight, my eyes on the boss. I'll be honest, for a second, I thought the boss might side with her. He's unpredictable, and he tends to reward charm and connection over competence. But I could see him nodding as I explained everything, and I felt a small spark of vindication. Elizabeth's face fell just slightly. She realized her help hadn't worked, and that her usual manipulations wouldn't save her this time. Later, back at my desk, I felt the adrenaline fade and was hit by a wave of exhaustion. I couldn't stop thinking about the audacity of it all. Elizabeth had been smiling the entire time, pretending she was innocent, yet she had set me up to take the fall for a problem she created. I kept replaying the encounter in my head, analyzing every word, every gesture, trying to make sense of how someone could be so manipulative and still look like a saint in front of everyone else. The worst part wasn't the embarrassment in front of the boss. It was the realization that this was just the beginning. Elizabeth had made it clear, without saying a word, that she would not stop. And even though I had handled it well, even though I had proved my competence, I knew the whispers would start again. "Did you see how she almost messed up the report?" she'd say to my colleagues. "Lucky Elizabeth helped fix it." And some of them would believe it, because she's charming, and I'm not. Not in the same manipulative, performative way. That night I went home feeling a mix of exhaustion, anger, and a strange sense of pride. I hadn't snapped. I hadn't lashed out. I had remained calm and professional, and I had owned the problem from start to finish. But I also knew I needed a strategy. I can't just keep reacting. I need to anticipate her moves, and I need to be ready for whatever she tries next. I also realized something else. Elizabeth isn't just a rival, she's a test. She's testing my confidence, my professionalism, and my ability to handle humiliation. And the truth? Some days I feel like I'm failing that test, even when I know I'm winning. Because humiliation isn't just about what other people see. It's about what they make you feel about yourself. And she is an expert at that. So here I am, Reddit, stuck in this insane office dynamic where the boss's daughter is simultaneously charming everyone and sabotaging me at every turn. I keep reminding myself that I am competent, that I am capable, and that I can handle this. But it's starting to take a toll. I find myself double-checking everything, second-guessing myself in meetings, and wondering if anyone really sees the difference between me and her. And worse, I know that this is only the beginning of a long game, one that she seems to have already started planning. Okay, things are officially messy. Elizabeth hasn't slowed down at all. If anything, she's stepped up her game, and I swear some days I feel like I'm living in a psychological thriller disguised as an office. But here's the thing. While she's still playing her little games, I've started noticing cracks. Not in myself, not in my professionalism, but in her. And let me tell you, spotting those cracks is oddly satisfying. It started with the friendly gestures, of course. She's still bringing coffee, smiling at everyone, complimenting outfits, even going out of her way to make small talk. On the surface, she's perfect. She's the kind of person who seems untouchable because she's nice, approachable, and effortlessly charming. But the moment you look a little closer, the pattern becomes clear. Behind that smile, she's constantly judging, measuring, and scheming. Every compliment is a setup. Every gesture is a test. A few days ago, I noticed her leaning into one of my colleagues, Daniel, during a team meeting. He had just suggested a minor change to a project, and she whispered something in his ear. I couldn't hear it, but Daniel's posture immediately stiffened. Later, he admitted to me that she had subtly questioned his competence, framed as helpful advice, but it left him doubting himself for hours. That's Elizabeth in a nutshell. Sweet, seemingly innocent, but designed to destabilize. I also realize that she's obsessed with appearances. She has this uncanny ability to read people's reactions and adjust her own behavior instantly. If she senses that someone admires her, she doubles down on charm. If she senses skepticism, she withdraws just enough to make you wonder if you're imagining things. And because of that, some of our colleagues are completely under her spell. I've caught myself wondering at times if I'm overreacting, but then I see it in her eyes, that little glint of amusement, and I know I'm not. Meanwhile, I've started noticing my own reactions. I feel my confidence returning, slowly but surely. The more she tries to manipulate, the more deliberate I've become in my actions. I smile politely when she offers help, but I don't let her get near my work. I stay composed in meetings, speak clearly, and ensure my contributions are unambiguous and documented. Every time I do this, I notice her momentary frustration. The smile never falters, but there's a tiny flicker, eyes narrowing for just a second, jaw tightening. That small victory keeps me going. There's also an unexpected twist. Some colleagues are starting to see her double game. It's subtle, just small comments or knowing glances, but it's enough to make her overcompensate. She'll suddenly over-apologize or make exaggerated gestures of kindness. The irony is delicious. The very tactics she used to dominate and charm are now showing cracks in her facade, and I can feel the dynamic beginning to shift, ever so slightly. But it's there. Still, it's not easy. Every day is a balancing act. I have to maintain my professionalism, avoid falling into gossip, and not give her the satisfaction of seeing me flustered. And honestly, some days are harder than others. I've caught myself thinking about meetings for hours after they're over, replaying every word she said, analyzing every reaction. It's exhausting, but I've started reframing it in a way that helps. Every manipulation, every whisper, every staged, friendly gesture is now data. I'm learning her patterns, her triggers, her strategies. I'm not just surviving, I'm observing. One of the more subtle maneuvers happened last Thursday. Elizabeth had deliberately sat next to the new intern during a presentation, whispering suggestions and corrections in a way that made him doubt his work. I noticed him hesitating mid-sentence, fumbling over slides, and my first instinct was to intervene. But I held back. I watched instead. He caught my eye, nervous, and I gave him a small nod, reassuring him. I didn't say anything aloud, didn't call attention to her interference, but just that small, silent gesture helped him regain composure. It was a quiet little win, but it felt significant. By now, I've realized something important. Elizabeth thrives on visible reactions. The more she sees people falter, the more power she feels, and the more she underestimates subtle strength. My strategy is simple: calm, composed, and observant. I'm not going to outshine her with flashy gestures or compete in the charm Olympics. I'm going to outlast her. I'll do my work, maintain my professionalism, and let competence speak louder than manipulation. The day ended with one of my colleagues quietly admitting that they'd noticed how manipulative Elizabeth could be. "It's like she's playing chess while the rest of us are playing checkers," they whispered. I smiled. That was exactly what I'd been thinking, and it gave me a sense of quiet satisfaction. I wasn't alone in seeing her for who she really is. So Reddit, that's where I'm at. Elizabeth continues to play her games, smiles at everyone, and whispers behind backs. But now I'm learning to see the patterns, recognize the strategies, and anticipate the moves. I'm starting to feel less like a victim and more like a player in this insane office chess match. And while it's exhausting, it's also empowering. Slowly, I'm learning that confidence isn't just about winning in front of the boss. It's about understanding the game, keeping your composure, and knowing that the small victories count just as much as the big ones. The corporate party was coming up, and I knew it was going to be a battlefield in disguise. Every year, these events are full of networking, impressing the boss, and showing off just the right balance of professionalism and charm. Normally, I wouldn't care about the social aspect. I've always preferred to stay in the background and let my work speak for itself. But after weeks of Elizabeth's constant games, this felt different. This felt like an opportunity. Not to humiliate her, not to compete in some superficial way, but to reclaim my own sense of confidence. I spent several days preparing. I wasn't trying to outshine Elizabeth, because honestly, that's a trap. She thrives on that kind of competition. Instead, I wanted to feel strong, composed, and entirely myself. I picked a dress that made me feel elegant but not flashy, carefully choosing accessories that complemented it without drawing unnecessary attention. I practiced my hair and makeup until it looked effortless, not perfect in an intimidating way, but polished in a way that reflected who I actually am. Even while preparing, my mind kept replaying previous encounters with Elizabeth. Her sly smiles, whispered comments, attempts to subtly undermine me. It all came flooding back. I reminded myself, this isn't a battle of appearances. It's about projecting calm, competence, and self-assurance. If I let her games dictate my mood, I'd be giving her exactly what she wants. By Thursday evening, I had everything ready. I looked at myself in the mirror and took a deep breath. I felt good, confident, calm, and ready to face whatever the night might bring. I knew Elizabeth would be there, dressed perfectly, smiling, charming everyone in sight. She'd try to interrupt conversations, make offhand comments, and subtly shift attention onto herself. But I also knew something important. Her charm is only as effective as people allow it to be. And this time, I wasn't going to allow it. On the way to the party, my thoughts kept spinning. I reviewed what I would say to clients, how I would respond if Elizabeth tried to insert herself into conversations, and how to maintain composure under scrutiny. I reminded myself of the weeks leading up to this moment, the whispered criticisms, the stolen credit, the little manipulations. I had survived all of it. I had adapted. And now I could face this event not as a victim, but as someone in control of her own presence. Arriving at the hall, I immediately felt the energy shift. Colleagues were mingling, drinks in hand, laughing and chatting. Elizabeth was there, of course, scanning the room like a predator assessing the terrain. Her eyes locked on mine for a brief moment, sharp and cold, and I caught a whisper that made my stomach tighten. "I'll do everything to get you fired." I just smiled back, calm and measured. Me? I just brought in a client worth $20 million. You might want to start looking for a job instead. The words felt good on my tongue, but more importantly, I felt the calm confidence behind them. The night stretched on with its usual mix of small talk and networking. Elizabeth tried everything: interruptions, pointed questions, jokes meant to embarrass me. But I answered each calmly, with facts, numbers, and composure. I noticed colleagues starting to see the contrast. She had style, sure, but I had substance. Each confident response, each steady answer, subtly shifted the room's perception. Even when minor chaos struck, a spilled drink, an awkward comment, a clumsy server, it seemed to work in my favor. Elizabeth's carefully maintained poise faltered in tiny, almost imperceptible ways, and I felt a quiet satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge. It was about witnessing the fragility of someone who relies entirely on superficial charm to dominate a space. By the time the evening was winding down, I realized something important. I hadn't needed to outshine her or publicly prove anything. My confidence, preparation, and calm demeanor had done more than any flashy gesture could have. I had created my own space, remained true to myself, and subtly demonstrated competence without ever lowering myself to petty games. The party was a turning point, not because of a single dramatic event, but because it reminded me that power isn't in manipulation or appearances. True strength comes from preparation, confidence, and staying grounded in your own abilities. Elizabeth might continue her games, but I had learned to navigate them, and that knowledge, that self-assurance, was worth more than any applause or attention. Walking into the party hall, I felt a mixture of excitement and nerves, but more importantly, I felt prepared. The room was buzzing with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Everyone was dressed to impress, exchanging pleasantries and networking like it was a high-stakes game. And then, my eyes met hers. Elizabeth, standing near the buffet, perfectly poised, hair immaculate, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. That icy glance said everything. She had arrived to win, to dominate, to make sure I felt small. She leaned slightly toward a cluster of colleagues and whispered something, just enough for a few heads to turn. Her smile was tight, controlled, and somehow menacing. I could almost hear the unspoken challenge. This is my world. You're just surviving. I squared my shoulders and stepped forward, walking with calm confidence, ignoring the flutter in my stomach. She was going to have to work harder than ever to throw me off tonight. The first few minutes were a test. She intercepted a client I had been speaking with earlier in the week and began laughing at something I couldn't hear. I approached, smiled warmly, and smoothly reintroduced myself. Good evening. I don't think we've officially met yet. Glad you could make it. She tensed ever so slightly, that perfect mask of charm flickering for a moment. I could feel it. She hadn't expected me to reclaim the interaction so confidently. She tried her usual tactics. Oh, I didn't realize you were speaking with him. That's interesting, she said in a way that sounded sweet, but was loaded with subtle judgment. Colleagues nearby stifled laughs, glances flicking between us. I kept my tone light and professional, smiling. Yes, we've been reviewing some strategies together. We're exploring options that could bring in significant business. Her eyebrows flicked briefly, irritation visible if only for a second. Then she masked it with another pristine smile. Throughout the evening, she attempted to draw attention to herself in 1,000 little ways, interrupting conversations, laughing too loudly, inserting comments designed to make me second-guess myself. But every time, I countered calmly. I maintained eye contact, answered questions with facts, referenced client numbers, and never let her theatrics push me off balance. Slowly, I noticed something remarkable. The colleagues who had once been dazzled by her charm were watching us both. Their smiles remained polite toward Elizabeth, but their attention was shifting. She had always thrived on the illusion of control, and now, just slightly, That illusion was cracking. A particularly bold move from her happened near the drinks table. She leaned toward a group of senior colleagues, speaking over me as I tried to add a point about a potential client. "I think that approach might be too conservative," she said, voice melodic, eyes on me. Normally, I would have felt flustered, but I didn't. I calmly finished my thought. "I understand your perspective, but based on our previous metrics and projected client response, this strategy has a strong potential for growth. Here's why." And I outlined it clearly, concisely, and professionally. The group nodded, visibly engaged, and I felt a subtle sense of satisfaction as Elizabeth's smile faltered just enough to notice. It wasn't all victories, of course. There were moments of tension that tested my composure. One of the boss's friends, who didn't know about our office dynamics, made a comment that sounded like it favored Elizabeth's insights. She smiled at me, expecting a reaction, but I simply nodded politely and continued my conversation with another client. The subtlety mattered. By not engaging in her games, I denied her the satisfaction of seeing me react emotionally, and it was starting to throw her off balance. Toward the middle of the evening, she cornered me near the buffet. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "You think you can just outshine me tonight? Don't forget who's in charge here." I kept my tone even, with the smallest trace of amusement. "Me? I just brought in a client worth $20 million. You might want to keep that in mind while planning your next move." She blinked once, her jaw tightening slightly, then forced a polite smile. That tiny, fleeting victory gave me a surge of confidence. I could face her without fear, without hesitation. By the end of the night, I realized something important. Elizabeth's charm and manipulations only work if people are willing to let them. By staying calm, confident, and prepared, I had subtly shifted the room's perception. People were watching, noticing the contrast between superficial charm and real competence. Elizabeth was still smiling, still playing her game, but the game had changed. And for the first time, I felt that I wasn't just surviving in this office. I was starting to influence how others saw the situation. This night wasn't about defeating her outright. It was about asserting my presence, my professionalism, and my self-assurance. And in that, I discovered a sense of power I hadn't realized I possessed. I walked out of the hall that night with my head held high, knowing that while the battle wasn't over, I had proven something crucial. I could stand my ground, calmly, confidently, and without compromising who I am. After the party, I thought things might settle down. I was wrong. Elizabeth didn't back off. If anything, she became more aggressive, more deliberate, more calculating. It's like she realized the subtle charm and whisper strategy wasn't enough anymore, so she switched to a more direct form of competition. And this time, it wasn't just about me, it was about everyone seeing who was better. It started on Monday morning, bright and early. She intercepted a team meeting I was leading, leaning casually against the wall as if she belonged there more than I did. "Interesting ideas," she said with a tilt of her head, voice sweet but heavy with condescension. "But did you think about the client's risk exposure in scenario 2? I read something about that recently. It might affect your plan." She phrased it as helpful advice, but the implication was clear. I hadn't thought it through. And the team's eyes flicked toward me, silently waiting to see how I would respond. I took a deep breath. I could feel the slight tension rising in my chest, the familiar anxiety that comes with being subtly undermined in front of colleagues. But I refused to let it show. "Thanks for pointing that out," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "We've actually modeled that scenario and accounted for the variables. Let me walk you through the updated projections." I clicked through the slides, explaining each number clearly, confidently, and concisely. I noticed the change immediately. The team started nodding, asking follow-up questions to me, engaging with the content instead of her interruptions. Elizabeth's jaw tightened ever so slightly, and her perfect smile faltered for a split second. That was enough. That tiny flicker of frustration was confirmation that my approach worked. Respond with facts. Remain calm and assert your expertise. She didn't stop there. Over the next few days, she tried to cut me off in casual conversations, interrupted my one-on-one meetings with clients, and even questioned my decisions in passing in front of the boss. Each time, I responded the same way, calmly, professionally, and with evidence to back up my points. I documented everything, quietly noting when she overstepped, when she tried to take credit, and how the team reacted. It felt like a chess game. She made moves. I anticipated. I countered. And slowly the balance began to shift. One particularly audacious attempt happened during a client call. I was presenting a proposal when Elizabeth chimed in. I think we could also consider a more aggressive approach, maybe something a bit flashier than what she's suggesting. I froze for a split second, not out of fear, but to center myself. Then I smiled, looked directly at the client, and said, "We've analyzed both approaches. The strategy I've proposed minimizes risk while maximizing ROI based on our latest projections. Here's a comparison." I shared the data, explained the reasoning, and left no room for doubt. The client nodded, impressed, and the rest of the team started taking notes. Elizabeth's lips pressed into a thin line, and I felt a surge of satisfaction. Even outside meetings, she tried to insert herself into my work. She accidentally showed up at my desk just as I was about to send an important email, leaning over with a charming smile and making a casual suggestion that was clearly intended to distract me. I barely looked at her. "Thanks, Elizabeth. I've got it covered." My tone was polite, but firm. She tilted her head, smiled tightly, and moved away, clearly annoyed that I hadn't reacted. I also started noticing the subtle shifts in my colleagues. A few of them began to speak up in meetings, not just nodding politely at Elizabeth's comments, but questioning them, asking for evidence, or looking to me for clarification. It was like they were quietly acknowledging the reality I had been trying to communicate all along. Competence matters more than charm. Seeing them start to recognize it gave me a quiet, almost private satisfaction. The mental toll is still there, though. Every interaction requires vigilance. I can't relax, can't let my guard down, because she's relentless. But I've learned something crucial. She thrives on visible reactions. When I maintain composure, when I calmly assert my knowledge and expertise, I strip her of power. The more I show that I'm unaffected by her interruptions, the less effective her attempts become. By the end of the week, I realized that Elizabeth was no longer just competing. She was testing me, pushing boundaries, and expecting me to falter. And I didn't. I stood my ground, maintained professionalism, and gradually earned the respect of colleagues who had once been dazzled by her charm. Each successful interaction was a small victory, a reaffirmation that competence and confidence could outshine manipulation and theatrics. It's exhausting, yes, mentally draining, constantly stressful, and emotionally taxing. But I'm learning to navigate this battlefield. The key is focus, calm, and preparation. Elizabeth may try to dominate, to interfere, to humiliate, but I've discovered a surprising strength in myself, the ability to respond with calm confidence, to assert my expertise, and to let my professionalism speak louder than her games ever could. And while the struggle isn't over, I feel a growing sense of control. For the first time, I'm not just reacting, I'm shaping how others perceive the situation, and that, I've realized, is a power she cannot steal. It was supposed to be a simple evening, just another corporate mixer with clients, colleagues, and that thin veneer of polite conversation. But of course, Nothing involving Elizabeth is ever simple. She arrived in full force, dressed to perfection, hair flawless, smile in place. She had already started her usual rounds, chatting, complimenting, laughing, leaning just enough to make people notice her without seeming pushy. I stayed calm, reminding myself this was my moment to stay composed, to be confident, and to let competence speak louder than charm. Everything was going smoothly until the unexpected happened. One of the junior colleagues, Tim, accidentally spilled a glass of white wine. The trajectory was perfectly unlucky, or perhaps perfectly timed, and the glass landed squarely on Elizabeth's dress. It was almost slow motion, red stains spreading across the delicate fabric, her face frozen in horror as gasps rippled through the room. She froze, trying to maintain dignity, but I could see the panic behind her eyes. That perfectly polished exterior, so carefully maintained, was unraveling. I want to be clear. I didn't cause this. It was a genuine accident. But watching it unfold felt like some cosmic form of justice. Elizabeth had spent weeks meticulously crafting an image of perfection, manipulating colleagues, whispering behind backs, undermining me in subtle ways. And now, she was vulnerable, human, and completely exposed. The sight of her struggling to maintain composure brought an odd mix of relief and satisfaction that I hadn't expected to feel. The room reacted immediately. Some colleagues rushed to help her, offering napkins and assistance, trying to salvage the moment without embarrassing her further. She accepted their help with that practiced smile, but it was strained, brittle. The way she tried to glide past the stain, covering it with her clutch and adjusting her posture, looked almost desperate. I stayed nearby, not to gloat, just to observe, feeling a small but undeniable sense of vindication. Elizabeth tried to regain control, speaking in a voice that was still sweet but slightly sharp. "Well, accidents happen," she said, brushing at her dress, forcing a laugh. "Nothing to worry about." She looked directly at me, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition, like she realized her image wasn't untouchable, like she finally saw that some things are beyond manipulation. I simply nodded, offered a polite smile, and continued my own conversation with a client, calm and composed. That tiny act of detachment said more than words ever could. The night went on, and although Elizabeth tried to recover, the spill had done something subtle but important. It humanized her. She was no longer the untouchable, perfect figure everyone admired or feared. Her composure was fragile, her charm imperfect, and for the first time, people were seeing her as fallible. Even if only slightly, the illusion she had worked so hard to maintain was cracking. Meanwhile, I felt my own confidence growing. I realized that I didn't need to humiliate her actively or compete with her theatrics. Life has a way of creating its own balance, and sometimes the smallest missteps, spilled wine, misplaced words, awkward moments, can reveal the truth more effectively than any confrontation. I stayed focused, kept my posture steady, my voice calm, and continued demonstrating competence through action rather than drama. After the initial chaos, colleagues began returning to their conversations, subtly glancing at Elizabeth and then at me. I caught a few small smiles, a hint of recognition in their eyes, that they were noticing the difference between style and substance. Elizabeth, of course, tried to cover it, maintaining her practiced smile, but the cracks were there if you looked closely. And I did. By the end of the night, it was clear. While Elizabeth's manipulations and charm had previously dominated the room, this small disaster had shifted perceptions. She remained charming, still socially adept, but no longer untouchable. And for me, it was a quiet triumph, not of gloating, not of revenge, but of simply staying calm, competent, and true to myself in the face of chaos. That night, as I walked home, I reflected on what had happened. Humiliation is a funny thing. It can come from your own mistakes, from someone else's actions, or from circumstances entirely outside your control. Elizabeth had spent so much energy creating an image of perfection, yet one accidental spill exposed the fragility beneath. And I realized something crucial. Confidence and professionalism aren't about never facing mishaps. They're about how you handle them, how you maintain composure, and how you let competence quietly shine while the chaos unfolds around you. I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The tension I'd carried, the constant awareness of Elizabeth's gaze, the whispered undermining, the subtle manipulations, felt a little less oppressive. For the first time, I could imagine navigating this office without being consumed by her games, without letting her attempts at control dictate my sense of self. Small disasters, it turns out, can reveal a lot. And tonight, one tiny accident revealed more about strength, composure, and true presence than all the whispers and smiles Elizabeth had ever managed. By the time the next week rolled around, something had shifted in the office. The subtle changes weren't dramatic, but they were unmistakable. Elizabeth was still there, smiling, charming, and whispering her usual comments, but the effect she once had was diminished. People were starting to see through her carefully curated image, and I could feel the difference in the air. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it was real. The first moment that made it clear happened during a client presentation. I had been assigned to lead the meeting, presenting our new marketing strategy. Elizabeth, of course, arrived early, leaning casually against the conference table, offering last-minute suggestions in that deceptively sweet tone she's perfected. But this time, I was ready. I listened politely, acknowledged her points, then calmly laid out the presentation exactly as I had prepared it. I answered every question, presented the data clearly, and articulated every projection with confidence. I noticed the subtle glances from colleagues. They were watching the interaction, and instead of deferring to her charm, they were engaging with my ideas. Questions came to me, not to her. When she tried to interject, I responded politely but firmly, demonstrating that her interruptions wouldn't derail the discussion. The boss, who often admired her superficial polish, nodded approvingly at my presentation. That small acknowledgement felt like a quiet triumph, but the real victory was in the shift of attention in the room. Later that day, I caught a few colleagues sharing whispers near the coffee machine. They weren't discussing Elizabeth's charm or her impeccable dress. They were discussing my approach, my calm demeanor, and my ability to handle pressure. A small but noticeable change. For the first time, I realized that competence, combined with steady confidence, can speak louder than theatrics. And it was working. Elizabeth, of course, noticed. Her attempts to dominate conversations were more restrained, more cautious. The sharpness in her whispers had dulled, replaced by tentative comments and forced smiles. It was subtle, but I could see it. The ice in her gaze had thawed slightly. She had underestimated me, and she was realizing it now. The pinnacle moment came during a team brainstorming session. Elizabeth tried to sidetrack the discussion, offering ideas that were flashy but impractical. She smiled, expecting attention and agreement. I calmly addressed her points, acknowledging them without demeaning her, then redirected the team to focus on actionable, well-reasoned strategies. Colleagues nodded, engaged, and contributed their thoughts. Elizabeth's smile faltered for just a moment, and I felt a wave of quiet satisfaction. She had lost her control, and it wasn't because I had humiliated her. It was because I had maintained my presence, professionalism, and confidence. It was a revelation. Victory doesn't come from defeating someone through retaliation or public embarrassment. True authority comes from consistency, calmness, and competence. The more Elizabeth tried to assert herself through charm and manipulation, the less it worked. My confidence, steady and unshakable, became the benchmark by which others measured competence and reliability. Even outside of formal meetings, the shift was noticeable. In casual interactions, Elizabeth was more careful, less overtly performative. She still smiled, still engaged, but there was a subtle restraint now, as if she recognized that her previous tactics would no longer guarantee influence. I felt a quiet sense of power, not from dominating her, but from simply being myself, confident and capable. By the end of the week, the atmosphere in the office had changed. Colleagues were more attentive to contributions, more willing to question and discuss ideas, and less swayed by superficial charm. I realized that leadership isn't about control or manipulation, it's about presence, clarity, and reliability. People notice, and slowly they begin to respect it. For me, the most satisfying part wasn't just the external validation, it was internal. I had faced weeks of undermining, whispered attacks, and subtle sabotage. I had kept my composure, stayed focused on my work, and refused to let manipulation dictate my emotions or actions. And now, the reward was quiet but profound. A sense of agency, self-respect, and professional confidence that no charm or deceit could shake. Elizabeth hadn't disappeared. She was still there, still trying, still polished, but she was no longer untouchable. And I realized that this was the real victory. Not winning a game against her, but demonstrating that competence, self-assurance, and calm professionalism are stronger than charm, manipulation, and theatrics. I had survived, adapted, and emerged not just intact, but stronger. That night, as I left the office, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in weeks. I wasn't just navigating the politics or surviving Elizabeth's games, I was thriving. And that, I realized, was the ultimate lesson. Confidence isn't about crushing your rival. It's about being unshakable in your own abilities and letting that strength quietly reveal itself to the world. The next morning, the office felt different. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but with subtle shifts that were impossible to ignore. Elizabeth was still there, her polished smile in place, her usual charm still on display, but the way she carried herself had changed. She was cautious now, measured, almost tentative in her interactions. It was like she had realized her usual tactics wouldn't have the same effect anymore. I noticed it immediately in meetings, where she used to dominate conversations, interject with pointed comments, or whisper suggestions that undermined others. She now waited. She spoke more carefully, phrasing her contributions as questions or suggestions rather than assertions. Even in casual discussion, she no longer leaned in with that predatory glint in her eyes. Her aura of untouchable confidence was replaced by a more restrained, careful approach. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. That was the remarkable part. I had expected that some confrontation or dramatic demonstration would mark the turning point. Instead, it was the quiet recognition of competence, the subtle shift in perception among colleagues, that created a new order. Elizabeth's games were no longer effective because I had stopped giving them power. By remaining calm, confident, and professional, I had created an environment where manipulation and charm no longer dictated outcomes. One incident that morning perfectly illustrated the change. During a planning session, Elizabeth attempted to interrupt me, starting a comment with her usual sweetness. I maintained eye contact, calmly continued explaining my point, and finished my thought clearly. She paused mid-sentence, realized the group was fully engaged with what I was presenting, and quietly withdrew. That tiny retreat wasn't dramatic, but it symbolized the shift in influence. She no longer commanded attention automatically, she had to earn it. Colleagues' responses had shifted too. I noticed more attentive listening, more thoughtful questions, and subtle acknowledgement of my input. People who had once been swayed by Elizabeth's charm now approached me directly, seeking advice, validation, or collaboration. The respect I had worked to maintain, and the quiet, steady confidence I had cultivated, was being recognized organically. It was also a relief on a personal level. For weeks, I had felt the weight of constant vigilance, the mental drain of anticipating Elizabeth's moves, and the emotional toll of subtle undermining. That tension eased as I realized I didn't have to fight her to maintain my presence. By focusing on my own competence and professionalism, I had created stability, influence, and credibility that weren't dependent on confrontation. Elizabeth herself seemed to recognize it. There were fleeting glances, small shifts in posture, a subtle restraint in her comments. She tried to assert her presence, but with caution. The icy confidence she once wielded as a weapon was tempered now by the understanding that her usual strategies could no longer guarantee influence. And in that, I felt a sense of satisfaction, not triumph over someone else, but confirmation of my own growth and stability. By the end of the week, a rhythm had emerged. Elizabeth's tactics were muted, the office atmosphere felt more balanced, and I could operate without constantly bracing for subtle attacks or manipulations. I realized that victory in this kind of environment isn't about dominating a rival. It's about consistently maintaining your own standards, presence, and professionalism. The new order wasn't about outshining her. It was about quietly demonstrating reliability, competence, and confidence in a way that reshaped the social and professional dynamics. As I wrapped up the week, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. The same office that had felt like a minefield, filled with whispered attacks and subtle manipulations, now felt navigable. I wasn't intimidated, I wasn't anxious, and I wasn't caught up in petty games. Instead, I felt steady, assured, and capable. And that, more than any acknowledgement or reward, was the real measure of success. Elizabeth didn't disappear. She continued to be present, polished, and socially adept, but the illusion of untouchable power was gone. And in that quiet shift, I discovered something invaluable. Authority isn't taken through theatrics or charm. It's earned through consistency, confidence, and professionalism. By maintaining composure and staying true to myself, I had not only survived, but subtly reshaped the office dynamic. I left the office that Friday feeling a sense of calm triumph. The tension that had defined the past weeks had eased. I didn't need to engage in her games or prove anything to anyone. I had created my own space, established respect, and built confidence that couldn't be shaken by manipulation. A new order had emerged, and this time, I was firmly grounded in it. Looking back on everything, it's hard to believe how much changed in just a few months. I went from feeling constantly on edge, anticipating Elizabeth's next move, to understanding that her games only have power if you let them. I've learned, painfully and sometimes with anger, that office politics can be brutal, but they're also navigable if you stay grounded in your own professionalism and confidence. The first few weeks were the hardest. Every whispered comment, every staged compliment, every attempt to undermine me tested my patience and my sense of self. I doubted myself more than I'd like to admit. I replayed meetings, emails, and conversations in my mind, wondering if I'd missed a clue, if I had handled something poorly, or if I'd given her the smallest opening. That emotional weight was exhausting, and for a while, it felt like I was losing not only to Elizabeth, but to the environment itself. But then I realized something crucial. I couldn't control her. I couldn't control how she acted, what she said, or how others perceived her. What I could control was myself, my work, my responses, my attitude, and my presence. Once I shifted my focus from reacting to her manipulations to maintaining my own competence and composure, everything started to change. I began to see the cracks in her polished facade. I noticed how colleagues responded differently to facts over charm, and slowly, subtly, the dynamic shifted. There were victories, but they weren't always dramatic. A successful presentation, a client impressed by clarity and confidence, a colleague quietly acknowledging my input. All of these small moments added up. The spilled drink incident at the party, for example, was minor in the grand scheme, but it revealed the fragility of the image Elizabeth had worked so hard to maintain. It reminded me that no one is perfect, and that sometimes life itself exposes the truth better than confrontation ever could. I also learned that confidence doesn't mean arrogance, and strength doesn't mean domination. True authority comes from being steady, competent, and reliable, even when others are trying to undermine you. It's quiet, consistent, and undeniable once it's established. Elizabeth tried to intimidate me, steal credit, and manipulate perceptions, but she couldn't break what I had quietly built for myself. By the time the office had settled into this new rhythm, I noticed something remarkable. Elizabeth's approach had changed. She was cautious, polite, and no longer relied on charm or whispered undermining to assert control. It wasn't that she had disappeared, it was that she had learned, just as I had, that influence in the workplace comes from substance, not style. And witnessing that shift without needing to gloat or retaliate was empowering in a way I hadn't anticipated. For anyone reading this who has faced similar situations, here's what I've learned. Focus on what you can control. Keep your work impeccable, your demeanor calm, and your confidence steady. Document your contributions. Speak clearly. Don't engage in unnecessary drama, but don't shy away from asserting yourself when necessary. And most importantly, remember that manipulative behavior only works if you let it. By staying true to yourself, you create a stability and authority that cannot be shaken by charm, deception, or whispered attacks. I can't say that working with Elizabeth was easy. It was emotionally taxing, mentally exhausting, and at times infuriating. But it taught me something invaluable about professionalism, resilience, and the quiet power of competence. I've come out stronger, more confident, and more capable of navigating not just office politics, but any situation that tests my patience, skill, or sense of self. Ultimately, the lesson isn't about defeating a rival, it's about affirming your own strength. Elizabeth tried to define my work and my worth through manipulation and charm. I refused to let her do that. I focused on what mattered: my skills, my composure, and my integrity. And in doing so, I not only survived her games, but emerged more confident than ever, ready to face any challenge without letting someone else dictate my value. I'm still learning, still growing, but one thing is clear: competence, calm, and self-assurance will always outlast manipulation and theatrics. And for anyone caught in a similar situation, remember this: you don't need to outshine your rival to win. You just need to be unshakable in your own abilities, and everything else will follow.